What's going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle back with your Week 4 waiver wire targets. Another week down in the NFL and another week of injuries, ineffective play, surprises. 2020 is just keeping us on our toes this season. That's why it's super important for us to be digging into the waiver wire every single week. Things are crazy right now. We got to work our way through that. And being able to go out there and get ahead of other owners on the waiver wire is one of the most important steps in being able to finish off a championship season. Had a lot of people to look at last week. The list won't be nearly as deep this week because a lot of those guys went up and over 50% owned. And keep in mind, for you to make this show, you have to be under 50% owned in leagues. So we're going to take a look at those guys that are a little bit of a deeper stash that you might be able to get your hands on before week 4 kicks off. So let's go ahead and jump into it right now, and we're going to talk about running backs to start. All right, the first of the 5 running backs that I have for you on this episode is a guy that is just getting a ton of volume right now. And honestly, that's what we need. For those of us that are dealing with ineffective play, injuries, maybe you didn't draft well at the running back position, whatever it may be, adding a guy right now that's getting a ton of touches isn't necessarily a bad thing. Myles Gaskin from Miami, only 20% owned, getting Seattle next week. Not the best matchup in the world for him, and he's not having performances that are out of this world, but he had 27 total touches for 128 total yards in week 3, and guaranteed touches are difficult to come by right now. And in Miami, Myles Gaskin is being looked at the guy that's kind of that lead back right now. And not only that, he's getting work in the passing game and on the ground. That's something, again, that you're not going to find on the waiver wire too often. So if you can run out there and get Myles Gaskin still, I would do it. Even if you're feeling good at running back right now, if you have an extra bench spot, it doesn't hurt to add a guy like this, because if his value continues to build up throughout the course of the season, number one, potentially you can trade him, or number two, you could trade one of your higher tier running backs if you need help, maybe at wide receiver or tight end or whatever it may be. You might be able to use Myles Gaskin as we go forward. More than likely just going to be like maybe a running back 3 or a flex option. But again, if you're adding a guy that's getting 27 touches a week, you can do a lot worse on the waiver wire. Moving on to my next guy, Darrell Henderson Jr., just under that 50% owned mark, but he was the lead back in week 3. He saw 20 carries compared to Malcolm Brown's 7, and they get the Giants next week. So more than likely, the Rams are going to have a lot of positive game script, allowing Darrell Henderson to really take off and have a good game. Now, a majority of his touches coming on the ground. Didn't see a whole lot of work in the passing game, but that doesn't mean that that won't happen in the future. Again, adding guys right now that are getting touches is always a good thing. Cam Akers is going to come back at some point. When is that? I don't know. But keep in mind that Darrell Henderson was really being looked at potentially being the lead back before suffering an injury late in training camp. So it's not like the guy just is popping out of nowhere. If he hadn't suffered that injury, he may have been the lead back going into week 1 anyway. And he's looking like the most explosive back right now on this team. Malcolm Brown last week did end up having the finger injury. Is that something that carried over this week? I don't know. But Darrell Henderson going up against the Giants next week, a good play for you to keep an eye on if you need help at running back. I was a little bit hesitant to start Darrell Henderson in too many places this week, but next week I'd be willing to go in a little bit more and say, yeah, Darrell Henderson is a guy that you can definitely flex in week 4. Jeff Wilson from the San Francisco 49ers, under 1% owned in fantasy leagues, gets a tough matchup next week with the Philadelphia Eagles, but he basically split touches with McKinnon last week. McKinnon did see a decent amount of work, but Jeff Wilson was basically right there next to him, 50-50 in touches. McKinnon, I think, had 2 extra touches than what Wilson did, but he did have 2 touchdowns, and he saw a majority of the goal line work. So when they're inside the 10-5-yard line, Jeff Wilson was the guy that came out. So he is a guy that probably not going to be a start in many leagues. Maybe if you're like 14, 16 team league, maybe if you have a lot of extra flex spots or something like that, you could put him in. But going up against Philadelphia, I'm not really feeling that next week. Jerick McKinnon, a guy that I feel like we'd see a little bit more than what Jeff Wilson will see. Frank Gore from the Jets. Yeah, if you're desperate, take a shot on Frank Gore. Only 16.6% owned. Does get Denver next week, but it's a Thursday night game. They have injuries all over the place right now in New York. The passing game is awful. I mean, Frank Gore, again, is a guy that's getting touches on the ground right now. So if that's what you need, if you just need to put somebody in your lineup that's going to get you touches, Frank Gore is a guy to do that. Is he going to have a ton of upside? No. He's probably going to average less than 4 yards a carry, but he could get anywhere between 15 and 20 carries next week, which again, deeper leagues, or if you're dealing with injuries or you just need a body, Frank Gore is a guy that's going to get touches next week. We know that for sure. And then at number 5, Carlos Hyde, under 6% owned right now, gets Miami this coming week. And the one thing I'll caution you against is a lot of people look at the Chris Carson potential injury. We don't know what it is yet and say, oh, Carlos Hyde, he's going to get ready to eat if he's the lead back. This is a different Seahawks team. This is a Seattle team that is throwing the football. Russell Wilson, 14 passing touchdowns in his first 3 games this season. This isn't the same Seattle team that in the past has just pounded the football over and over and over. Now, I will say the good thing about Carlos Hyde is if Seattle can get up early and they can get up by a lot, then yeah, maybe we use Carlos Hyde a little bit more. But again, they're throwing it an awful lot. So are we expecting 30 carries from Carlos Hyde next week? Probably not. My hope is anywhere between 20 and 25 if Carson isn't able to play last week, but we'll have to continue to monitor that and see what ends up happening with the knee issue and if it's something that's long term. Let's go ahead and kick it over to wide receivers now, though, and see who you should be taking a shot at there. All right, for wide receivers this week, the first one's going to be coming out of Buffalo, and it might not be who you would think. A lot of people are talking about Gabriel Davis right now, and I don't mind that pickup. If you're wanting to run out and grab Gabriel Davis, by all means, take the shot. The one thing about Gabriel Davis, though, is his value really relies on John Brown and whether or not he's on the field. If John Brown's on the field, you're not going to see a whole lot of Gabriel Davis. That's why for him, I'm kind of staying away from him this week because the guy I'm going to go after is the Beasles. Cole Beasley, 9% owned right now. And the thing about Cole Beasley is he can have some PPR upside even after John Brown gets healthy. Okay, the reason we're looking at Buffalo wide receivers right now is John Brown's dealing with a hamstring injury. How long is that going to hamper him, though? For Cole Beasley, he led the team in targets last week. Did Davis have the bigger plays? Yes. Did Davis have the sexier plays? Yes. But the Beasles is a non-sexy option for a team that really just needs to have a wide receiver that's going to put up some points. More than likely, if Brown were to miss any time or to be limited again next week going up against Las Vegas, Beasley is a guy that, 100% will be, you can stash in there, put him in your lineup. In PPR leagues, he's probably still going to get you double-digit points. Pretty close to it. He did lead the team in targets, so Josh Allen was looking his way quite often. So for me this week, that's why I'm kind of pivoting to Cole Beasley a little bit more, because I think Gabriel Davis is going to be the guy that everyone's going to try to get out there and get right away, and that's absolutely fine. Again, if you want to jump on the Gabriel Davis train, by all means, I've got absolutely nothing against him. I just think Beasley's the guy that long-term for this season might hold a little bit value for you as the season goes on. Randall Cobb, for Houston, he's finally seeing some volume. A good week last week. I've had him listed as starts the first 3 weeks. It finally ended up hitting under 5% owned. And really, with Randall Cobb, I think it was just going to take some time for him to develop that connection with Deshaun Watson. But Deshaun Watson looked to the slot quite a bit last year for the Texans. Whether it was DeAndre Hopkins that was out there, whether they were able to put somebody else in the slot, Deshaun Watson kind of looked that way quite a bit last year. And Randall Cobb working out of the slot. Again, if you've got Will Fuller healthy, Brandon Cooks healthy, you got those guys on the outside, it's going to leave a ton of opportunities for Randall Cobb to be open over the middle and on some of those short to intermediate routes. So keeping an eye on him for PPR leagues as well. Brandon Ayuk, 3.5% owned, going up against Philadelphia next week. I like Brandon Ayuk this week or this coming week because he was used a lot like Deebo Samuel last week. Now, when is Deebo going to be back? Okay, we don't know for sure. It could be very soon. But for right now, Brandon Ayuk kind of filling that role that Deebo Samuel did last year. He had 3 rush attempts. He had 5 receptions, and he had 8 targets in the passing game. So Brandon Ayuk was viewed as that kind of a player, a guy that you could, run some end rounds with, a guy that you could potentially put in the backfield as kind of a fake out, put him out in the slot, put him out wide, do some different things with like they did with Deebo Samuel last year. So for me, Brandon Ayuk, definitely going to grab him right now. Very low percentage wise owned. And then also they're going to be getting creative with him. Going up against Philadelphia, they're going to have to get creative because they've got injuries all over the place. And hey, if George Kittle comes back next week, which we all expect him to, that only helps kind of take that pressure off Brandon Ayuk and will make him even more of a target because you might not have so much concentration on him from the defense. And number 4, T. Higgins going up against Jacksonville next week. Cincinnati is only 1% owned right now. John Ross was a healthy and active last week. So could Higgins kind of become that third option? Okay. Right now, we obviously know AJ Green has been getting a lot of volume, right? We know that Tyler Boyd has basically become the wide receiver one there. AJ Green's just not turning that volume into production yet. But twice in the red zone yesterday, T. Higgins was targeted and scored a touchdown. So Sample was a guy at tight end that we looked at coming into the week that, okay, Joe Burrow really has liked his tight end so far this year. Sample's a guy that we need to have on our team. Maybe T. Higgins is going to be kind of taking over that role. Maybe as Burrow becomes a little bit more comfortable, T. Higgins becomes that number 3 option behind Green and Boyd. And heck, maybe even at some point becomes that 2 option. If Joe Burrow's feeling that connection with him and AJ Green and him just aren't vibing, maybe T. Higgins becomes a guy that definitely starts to see some more production and some more value as the season goes on. A guy that I definitely want to try and get this week, Greg Ward from Philadelphia, going up against San Francisco next week. Thought the New York Giants were going to smash against San Francisco, and holy crap, were we wrong. That was an absolute cluster of a game for the New York Giants. But for Philadelphia, Greg Ward had a team-high 11 targets, 8 receptions, 72 yards, and 1 touchdown. Deshaun Jackson dealing with an injury. Jalen Reagor dealing with an injury. Dallas Goedert dealing with an injury. So another team that's decimated with injuries. Greg Ward, adding him next week before San Francisco. Because why? Who else are they going to throw the ball to? Again, talked about it with running backs. If you've got a guy that's going to see some volume at this point in the season, why don't you add him? Because if you're adding volume, you're getting yourself guaranteed points at that point. Okay. So we want to make sure that we're having those guys in our lineups. Justin Jefferson, a lot of people may have given up on him after the first couple of weeks. His ownership percentage down to 16.3%, going up against Houston, but goes 7 for 175 and a touchdown. Will the focus on Thielen allow Jefferson to start to boom a little bit? The Minnesota D just hasn't been that good this season, so it's allowing a lot of passing opportunities. The one thing I will say about Justin Jefferson is that it's going to go with Kirk Cousins. So what type of a game is Kirk Cousins going to have? Is he going to play like he did in weeks 1 and 3? Or is he going to play like he did in week 2? If he played like he did in week 2, Justin Jefferson is going to be awful for you that week. If he plays like he did in weeks 1 and 3, Justin Jefferson is a guy that, yeah, absolutely, definitely a flex option. Looking at a wide receiver 3, potentially he can have some wide receiver 2 upside as well on any given week. Scotty Miller back on here. A lot of people were all over Scotty Miller last week. I didn't love Scotty Miller in week 2. A lot of people were super excited for him. I was like, this is an offense that's going to spread the ball around a little bit. And I still think that is the case. He did bounce back after a disappointing week 2. Chris Godwin dealing with a hamstring injury. So Scotty Miller has an opportunity to step up against the Los Angeles Chargers and then be that guy for Tom Brady, especially with the Chargers pass rush. Tom Brady's going to be boom, 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 trying to get rid of the ball as quickly as possible. Scotty Miller is a guy that could be in those short to intermediate routes, one that gets a lot of those really quick targets and then can produce some yards after the catch. Andy Isabella, is he going to become a thing? It's hard to imagine that any receiver for the Cardinals becomes a thing over DeAndre Hopkins. So Andy Isabella will be on this list for me, only 0.2% owned. He was 47 and 2 last week. But is he really becoming the number 2 option? Larry Fitzgerald hasn't been so far. Kenyon Drake's not really being utilized in the pass game. Chase Edmonds seeing a couple of targets here or there. Like I told you all, Dan Arnold is not a thing out in Arizona. So Dan Arnold definitely isn't the number 2 option. So maybe Andy Isabella is becoming that number 2 option. And we liked him in the draft last year. This was a guy with some explosive playmaking ability that could become a playmaker for the Cardinals. We could see that. So if you're going to go out and get him, absolutely stash him right now. Maybe not a for sure start against Carolina at this point, but somebody that could offer tremendous upside every single week. Keelan Cole, I'm going to put back on this list this week. 27.8% owned, going up against Cincinnati. Did not have the best game against Miami, but maybe it's because Keelan Cole just isn't that number 1 receiving option. If DJ Chark is back, that takes the pressure off. Chark sees the cornerback 1. Keelan Cole goes back to what we saw from weeks 1 and 2. So I'm going to put him back on there. Again, not necessarily trusting to put him in our lineup again, but somebody to stash if you have a deeper league, deeper benches, 14, 16 team, whatever it may be, you can grab him there. And Cordarrelle Patterson, 0.3% owned for Chicago. This is based on the Tariq Cohen ACL injury. Cohen done for the season at this point, it seems like. So Cordarrelle Patterson's a guy that's been seeing some touches out of the backfield for the Bears. Not only running the football, but now he could be in a position where he's going to be that pass catcher out of the backfield as well. Now, depending on your platform, more than likely Patterson is going to be a wide receiver. But what if I told you could put a guy in your wide receiver 3 or flex spot that's going to basically see some pass catching running back volume? Cordarrelle Patterson is that guy and could be this season. So depending on your platform, probably just going to be a wide receiver option. But because he's going to see some volume out of the backfield for Chicago, absolutely, we should be looking to grab him right now because he's going to supplement David Montgomery and he's going to see some decent volume out of the backfield. All right, I got a few options at tight end for you as well this week. Number 1 being Jimmy Graham, who apparently is still a thing. Jimmy Graham has basically disappeared over the last couple of seasons, but all of a sudden shows up out of nowhere against Atlanta this past weekend with a couple of touchdowns. So do we need to be adding him with Nick Foles now taking over at quarterback? Hopefully they continue to run with Nick Foles there. With Nick Foles taking over at quarterback, he could end up becoming something that we need to start paying more attention to. 2 touchdowns, 10 targets against Atlanta. Now, it was negative game script basically the entire game until Atlanta blew another lead, but he's only 13% owned right now, and he's got Indianapolis coming up next week. The tight end position this past week was kind of a wasteland. When we do our start and sit videos, we base our accuracy off 10 half PPR points. There was only 5 tight ends to score 10 half PPR points last week. It was a disaster of a week for tight ends. If you didn't start Jimmy Graham or like 4 other guys, you were basically screwed at the position this week anyway. So Jimmy Graham, somebody to keep an eye on. Mo Cox, Mo Problems, right? That's what we're calling him. Mo Alley Cox from Indianapolis, under 2% owned still, which really caught me by surprise that he wasn't higher owned, especially after the week he had last week. But over the last 2 weeks, he has 8 receptions on 9 targets and 161 receiving yards. Gets in the end zone this past week. Definitely a guy that we need to be adding. Even with Jack Doyle back last week, Mo Alley Cox came out and was the tight end to own for Indianapolis. So continue to try and add him if you need some help at the position. Drew Sample, I'll bring up again, under 3% owned right now, going up against Jacksonville. Didn't have a great game this past week, but over the first couple of weeks, we saw Joe Burrow go to the tight end quite a bit. Maybe it was a game script thing. Maybe it was a game plan type thing. That's the reason Drew Sample didn't have a good week last week, but we might be able to get him back in our lineups or get him back on our team at least and see if that volume comes back over the next couple of weeks. And then Logan Thomas, again, not a great week last week, but he continues to see a huge target share there in Washington. Dwayne Haskins is going his way quite a bit. So again, like I've said in the last couple of videos, if we've got guys with high target share, if we've got guys that have guaranteed volume at this point in the season, because of all the injuries, because of ineffective play, because how crazy it has been, we should be looking to add those guys. And Logan Thomas fits that bill perfectly. All right, so now we're getting to the streaming part of our show where we're going to talk about quarterbacks and defensive teams to stream in week 4 of the season. For my quarterbacks, we're going to take a look at 3. Jared Goff, Nick Foles, and Baker Mayfield. Jared Goff is going up against the New York Giants next week, so This is a team that just allowed 36 points to a depleted San Francisco offense. So Jared Goff and the weapons around him there, he definitely has an opportunity to smash next week against the Giants. Nick Foles for Chicago. If you're looking for a quarterback, he's under 0.5% owned. So he's not owned in a whole lot of leagues. You can run out and grab him right away. Going up against Indianapolis, he should be taking over for Mitch Trubisky at this point. I don't see a reason to keep running Trubisky out there. If you're willing to go away from him in week 3, you should just roll with Nick Foles, especially after that comeback victory that he had. And then, of course, Baker Mayfield for Cleveland. Going to mention him because he's at 18.5% owned right now, going up against Dallas. And the offense looks like it might be hitting its stride a little bit. It's looking a lot better. It's looking like the play calling is working. And honestly, with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb really being the main benefactors of that offense there, they're establishing that run game, which is allowing Baker Mayfield to not have to do a whole lot. They're not saying, Bake Show, go out there and win us games. Okay, they're winning the games right now with their run game, controlling the ball, getting Baker Mayfield into situations where he can do a little play action, roll out of the pocket. I brought that up last week. They did it again this past week. Baker Mayfield is looking like a guy that if you need to stream against Dallas, you probably could get potentially a couple of touchdowns out of because it might be some negative game script, whether it be a passing touchdown to one of the receivers or even Kareem Hunt out of the backfield, and probably get you around 200, 250 yards as well. So again, there are worse options out there if you need to stream somebody this week. Hey, last week on my defensive streaming options, I told you if you want to get a little frisky and roll Miami out on Thursday Night Football, go for it. A couple of you reached out to me and said that was an awesome call. They got a little frisky this past week and it worked out for them. So that's awesome to see. But the two defenses I'm going to look at streaming this week in the NFL will be Seattle going up against Miami. 47% owned. Fitzmagic looked good last week, right? Looked good on Thursday Night Football, but Seattle's defense is a little bit better than Jacksonville. So Seattle's defense definitely could step up and slow them down a little bit. And then Denver going up against the New York Jets. Denver going up against the worst offense with the worst head coach in the league with some of the worst weapons right now on Thursday Night Football in a short week. Sign me up. Sign me up. Denver's only 31% owned right now. I'm taking that all day, every day. If you need to stream somebody, Denver is a great streaming option this week. Just keep in mind you're going to have to add them before Thursday night because that's when they play this week. There you go, headliners. All of your options for week 4 that you should be taking a look at on the waiver wire. So go out there, get that fab money in, put your waiver wire claims in, whatever it may be. A lot of options again for you to take a look at this week. Do me a favor before you head out of the video, hit that like button if you appreciate the content. Leave me a comment below. Is there somebody that you're taking a look at this week, adding off the waiver wire that wasn't included in this video? Someone you think you should be taking a look at this week? Let me know in the comments down below. And then also, as always, if you're not a part of Headliner Nation, hit that subscribe button. Become a part of Headliner Nation today. Over 103,000 strong right here on YouTube. Headliner Nation, do me a favor. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.